All right, here we are, SUB-CLE. Today, we're going to go a little bit different. We're still going to do some local music in Cleveland, but it's going to incorporate some bartending skills this time. And I'm kind of excited to say I got to work with this guy. I learned a lot from him. Joe DeLuca. Joe, how you doing, man?
Hello, Vince. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, it's great to have you down here just because I just knew you as a bartender, and then we started talking music, and I come to find out that you were you dabbled in the local Cleveland music scene a little bit.
Well, it wasn't. I got to watch it from behind the bar. I saw a lot, 30 years behind the bar this past July, and the first 10, 15 years were pretty much in live music venues. So there was a lot of music scene in Northeast Ohio from regional bands around the United States. And then, 4 or 5 years in Austin, Texas in the mid-90s, which was rocking and rolling pretty good as South by Southwest got its legs underneath it and was really pushing forward.
When did that start, the South by Southwest? Was it when you were down there?
No, I think it was a few years prior, but okay. It seemed like that 95 to 2000 was when it really jumped. Had a much larger effect on the community as a whole. Right. An enormous influx of artists from all over the world coming in, and they're adding technology on top of music. They're adding film on top of it. So it was going through a huge growth phase at that time when I was down there. And just, you're in Austin, Texas. I mean, besides Nashville, LA, New York, where's there a music scene that's as vibrant in the United States? So I saw a lot of bands come through there. I saw a lot of greats, from CM Parliament Funkadelic, which always found fantastic. But, things like Mose Allison, things that you're probably not going to see in Cleveland, Ohio too often, or John Lee Hooker for $5. Right. Those opportunities existed in Austin in the 90s.
So you grew up around Cleveland area.
Yeah.
And then you went to Austin
after college.
After college, okay. So
started, grew up near Kent in a little town called Ravenna. Went to Kent State. My parents worked there, so it was an easy transition. And first really, I started out bartending live music at Mother's Junction. Yeah. So bands like Itow, Walking Clampets, Big Hunk of Cheese out of Pittsburgh, which was fantastic. Carlos Jones always around. Yeah. With whatever incarnation of his band. So a lot of these guys who are still around too that I still see.
So were you playing in bands, or did you start with the bartending and then got into the bands? And
no, my relationship with bands wasn't that I was playing music with them, but we were providing other acts. So I was founder of a project called Meat Circus. And so you have, clowns and ringmasters and 300 pounds of raw meat and a lot of power tools. And we would we would be the middle act between the opening band and the headliner that night. So, maybe you have somebody going back, Flint Rubble Bubble Cakes from Ken is opening. We're doing the middle act, and it's a 6-minute circus with raw meat, and then it transitions into Crack House Jazz Quartet.
So the vegan PETA person wouldn't.
No, my wife wasn't impressed even back then as we were first dating. It was really, I think my engagement with music was from being behind the bar, and then after the bar closes, having all these bands around for 15 years. And meeting the artists behind the music that you see on stage. It was an interesting lens into music culture.
So where were you working? So was it primarily all in Kent State, or did you do anything around Cleveland at all? Or?
No, we were at the legendary, JB's up and JB's down. Yeah. So you have, just before my time, the bands that is attracting even into the 90s is, Rollins Band. They're coming into the late 80s, and you have the Ramones playing at the Shark Club for $5. Right. I mean, this is as my career is starting. So you have these national acts that are still coming through college towns on the inexpensive, but you also have access to all when you have this very vibrant music scene that still, Northeast Ohio is known for. You know, someone like Al Mothersbaugh playing horns for like, you know, the name of the band, the Twist-Offs, you know, Mark Mothersbaugh's nephew. You know, you have the Numbers Band playing every Wednesday night at JB's up for years. I mean, I listened to them forever. And so you have Chrissy Hine's brother, who's the lead on that. And you have Chrissy Hine coming in once or twice a year to hide in a corner and watch. So even in Kent, and from there it was off to Blossom Music Center, working the VIP lounge there. And after college down to Austin, Texas, where that just continued with live music.
Nice. And you were bartending down in Austin, Texas too.
Yeah, running bars, running a jazz club in Austin. You know, you have, like I had mentioned, like Mose Allison. So you have this great jazz pianist who is, you know, a huge part of the beat movement. You have his manager warning you, like, listen, man, no cocaine until the third set. You give him cocaine before the third set, he might have never come back. Now, Mose is like, you know, nearly 70 years old at this time.
Yeah.
You know, and yeah, people
still
like,
doing coke.
Yeah, still doing coke. He's now passed. He lived to be a pretty ripe old age and performed up until his last days. But you know,
well, you heard it here first. You can do coke your whole life and be fine.
Yeah, apparently you can. Yeah, he told me a great story that he personally witnessed with Miles Davis back in the day. Miles was kept on a short leash with his heroin by his manager, and the manager's wife was holding his medicine for him, and Miles wasn't having any part of it. You know, he's up in her hotel room, and he just whips out his penis. She's like, "What are you doing?" He's like, "Well, your husband's about to walk through that door, and if you don't give me the heroin, I'm gonna tell him you've been on your knees."
Whoa.
So Mose Allison is like telling me this story, and it's, you know,
so when you say piece, like a gun or like
his heroin. No, he pulls out his
member. Okay, all right, cool.
Yeah, pulls out his member, and it's like, well, your husband's about to walk through that door. If you don't give me my medicine, I'm going to tell him that you've been on your knees.
That's funny. So, well, that's interesting. So, did she give him the heroin? I would assume.
I wasn't there. Mose never really followed up on that.
Okay. So, what brought you back to Cleveland?
Austin, Texas was fantastic, but it's awfully hot down there.
Yeah.
Our last summer there, I was finishing up a fairly large consulting project I had been on for a year, opening up a 9,000 square foot, very upscale billiards hall, basically.
Yeah.
And we had 100 days no rain, something like that, and we had 34 days of 100 plus, and my wife was just having no more part of it. And honestly, you know, you live away from home, all your vacations are home. And we decided we were getting ready to start our family. And it was like, it's time to come back to Northeast Ohio. Yeah. So it was the right choice.
Lakewood, Ohio, man.
Lakewood, Ohio, baby.
That is, it's probably got to, you know, it has to be the coolest, at least. I think that's a good word for it, suburb in Cleveland.
Absolutely. Well, I think my wife kind of nailed it. She said that it's the closest facsimile we could get to Kent without living in Kent.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a college town without a college.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
And you have the lake, and you have the metro parks, and
you have everything, dude. You're close proximity to downtown.
Yeah, you know, I mean, my career demanded that I be closer to a city center.
Yeah.
Just being in the adult beverage business for so long.
Yeah. Well, let's go into that. You definitely know your stuff. Now, because a lot of people have bartended, you know, but not a lot of people have taken it to an art, I would say, like you did, you know. So what made you want to transition into that? I mean, I would imagine it had something to do with all the eclectic people in Austin, you know. So.
Yeah, Austin was a big part of it. The food scene in Austin in the 90s, I really, you know, it was fantastic. It might not be as highbrow, you know, you're not going to have perhaps a 3-star Michelin like San Francisco or New York, even if either of those places have one. But its food scene, just on a grassroots level, what was being done was very high caliber. And so when the food starts reaching that elevated point, I think the drink follows it. And I could see what was going on. I could see where the pendulum was swinging.
Yeah.
That we were going to move towards fresh ingredients, that we were going to start raiding the kitchen.
Okay.
And then as the internet really takes off at that time, you start seeing these out-of-print bartending manuals that were written for the trade in the late 1800s, or even 1860s.
Was that like the Harry Johnson?
Harry Johnson,
Yeah.
the unfortunately named Harry Johnson. Absolutely. And we start realizing that everything we thought about making a Manhattan or an old-fashioned perhaps was wrong. That we were looking back at really the historical roots of these drinks. And I was lucky. I come back to Cleveland. I see someone like Paulius running Velvet Tango Room. He had probably just got that off about a year before I got back. Somebody dedicated to the craft. And I just fell down the rabbit hole, kind of as a geek and a historic, a love of history.
Yeah, absolutely. So you ended up coming back here. You were in the craft cocktail, but what were you doing? Where were you working at? What was,
When I first came back, I mean, I was lucky. I fortunately got a couple of consulting gigs. I had left Austin, and that's what I was doing full time. I was connected to with a very high-rated bartending school that is actually doing something unusual, like not a fly-by-night. People who went through the school, they were in great demand from the Austin bars.
Right.
So I had approached them and, hey, there's a lot of bars out there that need the financial back end help, theft control. And so I was like, why don't we start a consulting business?
Right.
You guys are already kind of getting these phone calls through the school. So we ran that business for 2 years, my business partner and I in Austin. I learned a lot. So when we came back, I was fortunate. I ran into several projects right off the go.
Oh, nice.
And then eventually moved into wine sales. And then it was a flip-flop back and forth between sales and consulting to feed my family.
Right.
Really.
Yeah. And, but you've, so with this consulting, I've met a few people that are, they say they're consultants,
right.
And I guess I'm kind of ignorant on that. So there's people that are opening a business and they have no idea how to open a bar.
No.
Is that what's?
No, you play several different roles, and depending on what the needs are, a lot of the big projects are project management.
Yeah.
What you're doing is trying to keep all the trades, all the salespeople, everybody that comes together, the guy that's selling you the china,
Right.
The hiring process. You're trying to keep everybody on task to meet a certain date line. So often that's what I played, was that liaison between all interested parties. Other times you're going in and fixing problems. I mean, we did a lot of theft control, a lot of spotting. It was really, I tailored it. Sometimes it's, consulting, you're telling somebody what to do or what they should do.
Right.
Project management, you're more hands-on. And a lot of it is, I was going in as a hired gun to fix the problem directly myself.
Right.
Amongst their staff during operating. Identify, fix.
Right.
So it was challenging, but it's there's a lot of people out there that have that on their business card.
Yeah.
And they start to undercut your prices, and then people get a bad taste in their mouth. So it was time to kind of move away from that after being in and out of it for a decade. Okay,
and then what were you doing after that then? Just
I worked for Southern Wine and Spirits as their key account manager. And so this is probably, the great thing about that job was we already saw momentum of a craft movement in Cleveland that was catching up to the rest of the country. Because I had met a few individuals, Dave Wilhite in particular, Chris Manello, Mike Gully. These were some of the first bartenders in Cleveland who were really interested in saying, hey, Paulius and Velvet Tango Room have been doing this for a long time. Probably we all should be moving in this direction. How do we do that? And it gained momentum. I happen to be just a little bit older than everybody else and in a position. So that job allowed me contact with bartenders every single day. And I took it from just not being a sales position, but take that part of the consulting. What can I do to solve this bar's problems as their salesperson? I have all this experience in the operations. How can I show them to use our product, and how can I teach bartenders? And so I had the joy of really teaching area bartenders, along with several other great educators in our community. We taught the next generation, and they're killing it out there.
Well, I got to tell I watch these all the time, and I say I got to tell you a lot. So I just caught myself doing it. But I go into some of the better cocktail bars in Cleveland, and it seems like everybody knows you. I was like, wait, I didn't know you until I met you.
Right. No, I had a lot of contact. I mean, I was running 75 bars. I was involved with our local chapter of the United States Bartenders Guild, which is a nonprofit group that self-educates career path bartenders. And so I had access to a lot of bartenders, a lot of managers. I was very active in sharing my knowledge, because when I was coming up, even though I knew that this was my career path, there wasn't a whole lot of information out there.
Right.
There really wasn't. I mean, there weren't a whole lot of books on cognac.
Right.
You work at, there wasn't a whole lot of call for cognac though either, so, it does change, obviously what kind of situation you're a bartender in. But I was always education hungry. And because of that, I had a really good base going into this craft cocktail movement we've seen travel around the world.
Yeah.
And was able to ride the crust and really have a great time teaching the next generation the skills to raise a family with.
Yeah, and it's kind of nice, because the Velvet Tango Room, I remember, back in the day, that was the only place that you can get a craft cocktail. Absolutely. That you would know. There's some places on the east side, but then you started seeing things like the Spotted Owl and the Tiki Bar, and then LBM now. I mean, and all those guys know you.
Oh no, I was, again, I was fortunate to sit through a lot of classes with them. I think early, especially when we were forming the Bartenders Guild with a lot of men and women who were career path bartenders. We got on the phone and just invited distillers, invited brewers, invited bartenders from other communities come in and lecture. Yeah. And because of that, because I sat in the classrooms with them, and then eventually they sat in my classrooms, and eventually now I sit in their classrooms, because so many of them now 10 years later are so talented and have made such an impact, especially in Northeast Ohio bars. And I just saw a bar near Worcester that's, I would consider, a family kind of joint. Yeah. And I saw they were featuring shrubs coming up. I'm like, okay, so they're taking this colonial drink that we saw come through craft cocktail, and certainly I understand it at a speakeasy bar or something where some suspended bartender is going to tell you more than you want to know about it. But it's hit these family restaurants that have bars, and I love it. You know what? I think bartenders they're engaged in what they're doing. They still need to focus on the guest. We all do, but it's great to see they're engaged with the history of our trade.
Right. So you were talking about the shrubs, and it actually made me think of shrubs. So where'd that come from? Because you said colonial. You took a colonial thing and brought it to
and it probably goes back farther than colonial times. Shrub is a traditional way of preserving summer fruit, basically. Right. And so vinegar. Yeah. That's it. That's your preservative. So you add this vinegar into your fresh fruit, and now you have fresh fruit, year round. Right. Well, if you actually take the juice of the vinegar out of there and balance with some sugar, it makes a really fantastic drink. Right. We see recipes going back, written recipes, certainly, back to we're back to colonial times. Yeah. And I'm going to guess that obviously this was a way to preserve fruit on ships, so we're probably even going back farther than that. Well, as Western Europe invades the world. Right.
But they weren't making drinks with it at that point.
They were they? Yeah, absolutely. But you would have when you look at old books from, say, 1860s to 1880s, the golden age of cocktail in America, you see them more as a temperance drink, where we're not adding alcohol to them. That this is something for children. This is a nice thirst quencher for the Baptists on a Sunday. Presbyterians are probably putting a little gin in theirs. But, as again, I said, as the internet expanded and we started having access to these out-of-print books and bartenders started looking back, we discovered a lot about our trade. We discovered a lot about what the intention was of the men and women who created these drinks. And then we put our own thumbprint on it. So I think shrubs and swizzles and anything that lives in that category, was due to being modified and to add a little bit of fun juice to it.
So why were the late 1800s the golden age of cocktail? Like, what happened at that point? I heard it was like ice was invented at some point.
Ice has a big part of it, and there's a great book out there called The King of Ice. And it's about how a single person creates the ice industry in America at this time. I mean, perfectly in conjunction with this. I think you have a post-war boom going on in northern cities.
Yeah.
And you have a lot of people out cocktailing, and you have the barman still is the bar is still the go-to place for information in your neighborhood, and the barman is kind of the arbitrator and judge of all things in his neighborhood. And they start mixing things together. These, we see, it's moving from medicinal, that we're going to add, why do we have vermouths? These are, things that make your stomach. What do we have? Bitters, things like Angostura bitters that goes all the way back to this time.
Right.
These were things that pharmacists use. And so you move from the pharmacy and here, drink this, you'll feel better. Well, sure. I mean, a bunch of chartreuse is going to make you feel better at 129 proof or whatever it runs at.
Now, is that is that what the bottled and bond? Isn't that
bottled and bond? Yeah, comes. This is as because you have because we have cocaine and Coca-Cola,
right? Yeah.
Because we have laudanum and over-the-counter soda pops.
Right.
We see two laws come down right at the turn of the 19th century into the 20th, the Teddy Roosevelt era. They're the Pure Food and Drug Act is one of them. And Bottle and Bond comes along with that, as well as how do we ensure purity in a product.
Right.
This is also manufacturing. We don't have bottled whiskey in the 1860s.
Yeah.
You take your flask up to the local tavern and get it filled up with whatever whiskey they have behind the bar. They can claim it's anything. So bottle and bond becomes a way to alleviate taxes on product lost through evaporation, but also to ensure that what's in the bottle is exactly what you're being told it is.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So, I thought it, and then you needed like a prescription at some point.
Prescriptions come along during Prohibition.
So that was later.
So this comes later, but these all two kind of fall on each other's tails. Prohibition is, it's interesting living here in Northeast Ohio because Oberlin is one of two hearts of the Prohibition movement.
Is that right?
The other one is also here in Ohio, but maybe Springfield.
Why Oberlin?
They had printing presses, and so you had Oberlin, who has women at their college who are pushing hard for the vote. And believe me, the suffrage movement is tied. The suffrage movement, the passing of income tax amendment into the Constitution, and Prohibition are tied extraordinarily close to each other. Women were fighting for the vote.
Why?
Part of their platform was anti-alcohol because their husbands would spend up all their money. They had no political clout to stop this.
Okay.
So temperance and Prohibition kind of hold hands together. They have a lot of the same enemies. So they can be friends. And you have these printing presses where they can print pamphlets for the suffragette movement and also for the temperance movement coming out of Oberlin. So that helps a lot too in getting your message out. And so they get the right to vote. They vote in income tax because they have to be able to replace the federal revenue through alcohol, which at that time was about 60% of the Fed's revenue.
Okay.
So to replace that, we income tax people and we enter prohibition.
Right.
A couple distilleries are allowed to stay open, and prohibition is, you know, a lot more about transportation, sale, and manufacturing. But it's not just the manufacturer. Drinking alcohol is not illegal.
Right.
So if you store it up, you could have as much. You could drink as much and throw as many parties as you want. So the prescription comes in where alcohol is still used, especially in rural areas, as you know, painkiller, inexpensive, and so you can get a prescription for 1 pint of 80 proof or bottled in bond 100 proof alcohol from your pharmacist a week. So you get yourself 6 doctors, you get yourself 6 pints, and you're rolling right along. You can find them on eBay.
Yeah.
A prescription for about $25 these days.
Right. That's funny.
If you like bar and pharma, it's a great piece, actually.
Well, it's funny because probably in about 60 years, we're going to look back on marijuana like that, you know?
Oh,
it's
absolutely.
Like, you know. So you said, but I really am curious. Do you know why Oberlin? I mean, at that time, so what year are we looking at? The Prohibition 20s?
20s. So we're talking coming, you know, the suffragette movement. So they just had a big milestone birthday recently this summer.
Weren't they like wasn't there a big thing in New York with the women's suffrage? Maybe Syracuse or something. Isn't that a big state for?
It may be. I know, you know, but probably, like I say, you know, Oberlin, I think you have a college that, you know, has always accepted women. So and you have this liberal, you know, you know, it's always been a very liberal, progressive university. I think even to this day, you know, outside of maybe the music conservatory, but it's certainly always had a place in Ohio politics.
But they wanted alcohol.
Again, I think you have a couple things coming together. The suffragette movement. I think you have women who are tired of their husbands being drunk.
That's right. Yeah.
You know, and you have plenty of temperance men as well. But I think they had the printing presses. Yeah. And they had the will, and
Why did they have the printing presses though?
They must have had. I don't recall honestly.
Yeah. Okay.
But I know that was they could print millions in a month. Yeah. Of pamphlets and leaflets, and they had a distribution network across the country pushing for suffragette and also for prohibition. I mean,
that was like Facebook of that day, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Because now, you know what I mean? Now you could just instantly get all of that stuff, you know? The Revolution, the American Revolution print press was key.
Oh, I mean, what's the most, I think the History Channel 30 years ago did a countdown over a couple of weeks of the most important invention ever, and printing press ends up being it. Like, it's certainly, but here in Ohio, there's a lot of history here in Ohio with Prohibition. I spent 3 summers ago, I spent a lot of time at Lakewood Library looking at the Sun News, which has been around for over 100 years for communities here in Northeast Ohio. It was a weekly, but I went through 1919 to the end of Prohibition, and scanned and pulled stories out and photographed stories about Prohibition and bootlegging here in Lakewood and Rocky River, and Cleveland in general. I mean, you're going back to the Sugar Hill gang and back to mob control of sugar because they're making illegal hooch. Yeah, they're fighting up on Murray Hill over this. Cleveland's got a rich history of in Prohibition. Nice. Yeah. Well, it was a bigger city back then. You know, it was probably one of the biggest cities. In the 20s. I mean, we had the Terminal Tower. It was like the tallest building in the world at the point. No, it was. It's amazing when you look back on the history. There was the Cleveland Air Show at one time was a huge world event, and we also had this Great Lakes Expo that was here right before Prohibition. That was really interesting. And as you're going through articles about this exhibition, they basically built almost like Chicago's White City. They built that like where Municipal Stadium and along the lakeshore there was, and just a very long running fair. But every newspaper article from that time talks about the beer garden, and the thing that everybody drank that summer was grapefruit wine. And I'm talking article after article always mentions the grapefruit wine in the beer garden. I'm like, never been able to find anybody that really knows, like, was it really made from grapefruit, or was it some kind of batch cocktail? But nobody's been able to answer that. I've been through the Cleveland Public Library archives looking, just like, can I get, some idea of what it is?
I don't know. Maybe this is because grape is a fruit, right? Maybe it was like just a regular wine.
No,
maybe.
It's grapefruit. Grapefruit. Who knows? It could have been.
That's the way they talked about it back then. I don't know.
Yeah. No, Cleveland, I mean, we have, you'd mentioned LBM and Spotted Owl, Porco, we had one of the great, last great tiki bars of the beginning of tiki from the late 30s, 40s, here in Cleveland up until the 70s. Cleveland's got a great drink history.
So what about that tiki bar? Because the
kon-tiki.
Yeah.
The kon-tiki was nestled, I believe, in one of the larger buildings downtown that at one time was used as a hotel. I'm going to flake on which hotel it was in. But that lasted, it may have even lasted into the 80s before it finally closed. But if you want to see an enormous amount of memorabilia, go to Porco, because they have a lot of kon-tikis items. There was a gentleman in Cleveland who had the forethought to collect all of that and house it. And before he passed away, he made sure that Porco got his collection, and they were able to decorate their barn. And so they're great historians about that bar in particular. We Harry Craddock, who ran the Savoy Bar in London for many years, started his career here in Cleveland. Yeah. As a waiter, and then moved into bartender. And then when Prohibition hits, like many professional bartenders, he leaves and goes to Europe, where he can still practice his trade. Right. But he wrote the Savoy cocktail book. A tome that sits on pretty much a lot of bartenders' shelves. Nice.
So you said it. What happened in the 80s that made the tiki bar kind of? Because I'm thinking about the 80s, and that's about. I was still a child at the time, but I remember, I don't know. I think of Miami Vice and nightclubs, kind of like that.
Yeah, no, this was the last great holdout of something that, had been dying a slow death for 30 years. Honestly,
really?
We think tiki at its high point in post-World War II is already kind of going away as we come into counterculture of the 60s. And where you see it kind of move to in a lot of ways was in the realm of Chinese restaurants and other Asian restaurants, where that's where you're going to find the Mai Tai. That's where you're going to find these classic drinks. And even that starts to historically, we don't have orgeat syrup, so we'll just use this. And now the drink isn't the drink at all anymore. Right. And so as we see craft cocktail come back, and we see some well-researched tiki bars across the country start to open. Porco was on the front of that, and they don't like to be, I think, thought of as just a tiki bar. Their wall of booze is so impressive, and their collection of all things spirit and their knowledge. It's a great team. I can't say more, more kind things about them. But if you want an authentic tiki experience, listen, this is it. This is 1952, man. Yeah. And Oshkosh, or wherever your local tiki bar is.
Why did the tiki? It had to have been just because the soldiers came back. They were in the Pacific Islands, probably. That was popular. Is that what it is?
Yeah, you have Trader Vic and another gentleman who have already started kind of down that path. Yeah. But it didn't really gel till post-World War II. And that's where we really do see this idea of faraway places, men who, unfortunately, probably weren't seeing a whole lot of tiki bars in the island nations during World War II.
But people are hearing about these island nations they probably never heard of before.
Right, Midway, Hawaii's about as exotic as they got. Right. And so, you do have this two guys on the West Coast saying, hey, with very similar concepts, pushing tiki culture.
That's cool. Yeah, and then, so tell me about the bar scene in the 80s. That's where I was kind of going towards.
Okay.
I wanted to get your opinion on what actually happened.
All right, so I am underage in the 80s, so, but I'm a teenager, and let's just say my interest is already kind of there.
Yeah.
What I saw was absolutely, my career starts at probably in 89. Is when I take my first restaurant job, working the door at my very first bar job, because I wasn't 21 yet.
Yeah.
My lens was very narrow, living close to a college town, living in a college town.
Yeah.
You still saw the high-end bartending was only in hotels at that time.
Right.
You still had white glove bartending probably going on in Cleveland hotels and fine hotels. You certainly have Dale DeGroff starting at the Rainbow Room in New York, who's starting to see this idea of what happens if we really use lemon juice.
Right.
So this is the 80s. So this is the seeds are starting to be planted. But from what I recall, was the money was in meat markets.
Oh, right.
I'm coming down here as a teen and walking the flats at its height. I mean, so it was.
Yeah.
It was really like it was over the top. People getting together and having a good time.
Yeah.
It was, but I think that's where the money was in high volume shots. We get into the disco drink era where American palate starts to get dumber and dumber after World War II for a lot of different reasons. Convenience of food, packaged food, space race as a huge. I mean, Tang, products like that.
Yeah.
This idea that we can make things taste like orange juice, I suppose. Again, drinks follow food.
Yeah.
So as we get into things like, Grandma's ambrosia salad, or Aunt Lynn's Jell-O, drinks are going to follow that direction. And so we go through this period of hyper sweet, fun drinks. I mean, people like to drink. They taste good. Listen, I mean, a lot of people don't like the taste of alcohol.
Right.
So that's what the 80s really was.
Sure.
It was about convenience, lowest cost denominator in your bar, and everybody having a hoot.
Yeah, yeah. And what do you think, when do you think it kind of, I'm sure when it switched back into more of a craft? Kind of. It
was, I'm going to say really around 2000 is when we start seeing it. So, I mean, most people don't recognize this except for maybe the last 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
But as somebody who had already been in the industry for 10 years, 20 years ago, those of us who knew we were in for the long haul could see it. That we were going to follow the food. The Food Network changed everything in America. It made people interested in food, made people interested in the provenance of their food.
That's right.
Cooking technique, and where the food goes, the drink is going to follow every time.
So, and Cleveland has no shortage of good food.
No, absolutely not. That was, we had started this conversation, why did I come back from Austin? It was because I'm seeing Donna Kritz and Mike Simon and Karen Figg on national magazines. As up and coming chefs. And I'm like, when my wife wanted to come home to start our family, I was like, we can go home, man. Cleveland's at a point where they've caught up, and here we go. And I want to be a part of that. So it has been coming home right at the beginning, although it has been very good for my career and keeping me employed.
That's cool, man. No, and you were talking about, around that time that you came back, you got into the craft, whatever, and then you were talking about the educators around Cleveland. Can you speak on that a little bit?
Yeah, I'd mentioned that I had met some like-minded people who started seeing what Paulius was doing was going to get more widespread, and that it needed to, that we needed to make
Velvet Tango Room.
Yeah, Velvet Tango Room.
Yeah.
And so we start talking with Mike Gully, if you remember Old City Soda, that was his project. Chris Manello, who's been in the business forever, and a gentleman named Dave Wilhite. And we knew that there was a United States Bartenders Guild. And for the longest time, I'd been aware of it when I lived in Austin. It was down to one chapter of a bunch of Hispanic Americans that were kind of banded together and really pushing to keep their craft high. They were all pretty much hotel barmen.
Okay.
And as there's more and more interest in it, we start to see that chapters start opening up in other cities. We were on the front edge of that. We knew that Oregon had something separate called the Oregon Bartenders Guild. There was nothing but to serve bartenders as an educational tool.
Well, in Portland,
so when you get, when you this allows you to finally, I've got 30 bartenders, and you can go to a brand and you say, I have 30 bartenders in this guild or this loose group that we're trying to organize into a nonprofit chapter. That gives you some movement with the brands to say, hey, you have a brand ambassador named Angus Winchester from Tanqueray.
Yeah.
Could you bring Angus to the Cleveland market for 3 days and teach us? And that was the great part of getting together and creating educational opportunities for each other.
That's cool.
Bobby Gleason from Jim Beam.
Right.
Lots of great educators, but it was getting on the horn and bugging our brand reps. Hey, bring this educator here. We want to learn. We want to learn.
Yeah.
It was fun to be in the front of that.
Well, and it's promotion for the company too, because I know I put together like an art and music show over in Parma, and just asking Jim Beam to come by and just give away kind of some free samples and stuff like that.
It's getting people to change buyer behavior in the whiskey world's hard. But
they love talking about their product too, and you get to learn a lot, about these things.
No, there's a lot. I mean, that's, the brand ambassador and the fact that brands move, that's a huge change in what bartenders have access to. Yeah. Again, I mean, when I started my career 30 years ago, there was so little, of this. Now there's so much access to education that if you want, listen, education is great when that guest says, hey, I'd like an Ardbeg on the rocks. And you're like, oh, I'm sorry, I don't have Ardbeg, I have Lagavulin. Right. Because you know enough about the products to be able to move them to a product. At the end of the day, it's still bartending, it's still smiling and making people feel good about themselves. And education doesn't always translate across the bar to the guests.
Yeah. Now, well, let's talk about that, because that's something I've gotten into the past few years is bartending, and it's mostly engaging with the guest, and then having the knowledge, because I mean, like I said, there's a lot of people have been bartenders, but a lot of people don't know how to make a aviator. You know what I mean? Right. Aviation. So it's like, so when you can have that aspect of it, I think it really adds to the experience. It really helps, the guest experience. And, like you said, with the Food Network, I mean, everybody is kind of a aficionado on everything nowadays.
Everybody's an expert.
So you have to be like kind of one step above, Yeah.
I tell young bartenders on why you self-educate, and a lot of it is when it's 3 deep on a Friday night, man, I don't want you talking mash bills with the customer.
Right.
However, when it's 3 o'clock on a Thursday afternoon and you've got 4 gentlemen at the bar, 4 ladies, that's the chance of when they ask you a question, you introduce them to something new and you tell the story about it, you turn your $3 tip into a $10 tip.
Right.
That's where your education and leading the guests to the experience is essential. That's that one-on-one engagement.
Right.
There's also so many different ways and so many different. What makes a great bartender? Well, what makes a great bartender is, can that bartender react to what the guest needs right now? So I've seen fast bartenders. I've seen some of the fastest on the planet. This guy Jeff Newmeyer out of Austin, Texas, who followed basically vacation circuit around. So he'd be up in the mountains of Colorado during ski season bartending. He'd be out in the fall. He'd be someplace in New York up in the Adirondacks. But he basically followed kind of the vacation cycle. But the guy was, I've never seen a faster bartender.
Yeah.
That's great. Then I see bartenders who have the gift of gab and just make people feel comfortable. That's great.
Right. Yeah.
What does the guest need right now? I mean, education is great. The education shows your engagement to the industry you're in.
Do you think it's so he was the fastest, but would you say he's the best?
No, the best. People ask me. Dale DeGroff, again, who was on the very forefront of planting the seeds of where we are today out of the Rainbow Room. He always has told me, don't look for good bars, look for great bartenders. Yeah. That's who you want to sit across from. So I know who, when I go to a bar, who I want to sit across from. Right. And that's who I choose. I mean, right. There are bartenders, who are my personal friends who I want to sit across their bar. Then there are bartenders who are I'm friendly with and are colleagues, but we're not loaning each other money anytime soon. But I like to sit across the bar from them because I love to watch them work their bar. I love the hospitality they show me, let alone their other guests. Yeah. Mike Smith, this young bartender generation behind me. I think he's at the 9 right now. Yeah. He was at the Marriott East for many years. Family guy, has 5 kids. Yeah. I love sitting across the bar from him. He's a fun bartender. Sure. He's better than me. At that part of the job. Well, no, I really do appreciate a good bartender. I mean, it really is. It really makes the place. You can have whatever business model you want. If you don't have the right bartender behind that bar, I don't think it's going to work out too well. It's a people business. What do you think about flair bartending? Oh, I think it has its place. Yeah, absolutely. I met a lot of flair bartenders over the years. Worked with a lot of flair bartenders over the years. Listen, in the right setting, it's great to watch. Listen, this is about entertaining the guests. This is about so just stop and do the show. I think is great entertainment. In the proper place. The best flair show I ever personally saw was in a bowling alley in Naples, Florida. And this kid was like ranked in the world on, there's also team competitions, 2 bartenders together, besides just singles. And this kid was ranked in the world in the top 10 with his team. And he just happened to be summer gigging it at his parents' house and working this bowling alley. But he treated us to a show. He's like, I never do this here. It's inappropriate to do it here. Yeah. He's like, when I'm out on the cruise ship, this is what I'm doing. Oh, right. So I like it. And you have something now that's called working flair. And as we look at the bartender behind this giant piece of furniture that's the focal point of the room in a lot of restaurants, people's eyes are on us because they're seeing things they never saw before. Shaking drinks. Less than 10 years ago, you never heard that sound. Right. That tall spoon, the only time you saw that pulled out was to get the tips out of the tip jar. Right. So people are more interested in the hand things that we do. Yeah. And so that changed into what we call working flair. Things as simple as spinning a tin that's actually more ergonomic and quicker behind the bar has devolved into a little twirl of a spoon, a little of this, a little of that. Give them what they want, Yeah. No, yeah. You could just twirl the spoon, flip the cup. And it really is practical too, It's a quick motion. You're getting things done, And, but even impractical. I mean, I've made a lot of money blowing fire the last 30 years behind the bar. I mean, the management's like watching their product go up in flames. One of the two bartenders who took me under their wings taught me how to blow fire early in my career. So that's always served me well, having that trick up my sleeve. Again, where is it appropriate? Where is it not? Right. Oh, everything's the right time, right place, So, so what are you doing now then? I am in the twilight of my career. I am disengaging from the leadership role that I've had and enjoyed the last 10 years in our community. For several reasons. Mostly it's time to make room for the next generation as they become business owners. B, my kids are teenagers, and my wife doesn't need to raise them on her own. I need to be engaged in that. And so I've moved back to bartending. Unfortunately, like many, I'm on furlough right now.
Sure.
And I'm hoping to finish my career behind the bar, actually.
Oh, okay. Because you have some other things going on.
No, my wife is a professional artist, always has been for many years.
Yeah.
And as we're navigating e-commerce, my role in her business, even though I've also been a visual artist, performance artist, my adult life. Yeah. We've moved into that, so we lots of Etsy shops, Sheila Weil Studios on Etsy.
Yeah, there you go.
If you like mosaic and fine handcrafted pillows, and so we do, we still do a lot of graphic design work for the restaurant industry. Yeah. Design menus for some of your better known bars, okay. And so we use our art skills and have parlayed that to where, I'm still touching the industry every day, but my role as an educator is coming to a close.
Well, I think you gave everyone our 30 viewers, some education. Maybe it'll be more now. No, but you definitely have a lot of information. Man, I could just pick your brain all day. Really, I would. We'd be standing around and I'd be picking your brain all the time.
No, that's what I did a lot of whiskey classes. Yeah. For the general public over the last 5 years, cocktail classes, whiskey classes, and you schedule these things for an hour 20, and you get a couple drinks. I mean, man, I'll talk 4 hours.
So what's the new? So whiskey has been bourbon, especially has been super popular, and I don't know. It seems like tequilas gained a lot of popularity too. You think we're gonna go back into gin sometime or what?
Nah, the numbers are holding at 3%. And have been for a long time, and you have adorers who are always going to love it. Gin's a tough one. If you don't like gin, find a great bartender who really loves gin, and they'll make you something fantastic. Go find a well-crafted Singapore sling; it'll change your mind about gin. Yeah, that's a tough one. Whiskey, the pendulum is swinging. Nobody drank whiskey for years because their parents drank whiskey. Right. So the 70s counterculture gets us into vodka. Right. Now we want to have a more refined palate than our parents did during the disco years, so we swung back to whiskey. Right. That's a lot of it. And there's a lot of history, and again, as people learn the history,
could be a lot of marketing too.
It is. The history of bourbon in America is cycles of boom and bust. Always has been, always will be. It's going to come in favor and out of favor constantly. Yeah. It's going to be here for a while at an elevated level, but it was at a huge elevated level up until World War II and was steadily declining since really the 50s. Yeah. Because, you think of somebody like Buffalo Trace. I mean, they've got to be killing it right now because their products just fly off the shelf, They're killing it, but they're not they didn't raise their prices that much. I mean, the black market's what's driving the really crazy numbers right now. And they all got stuck into a problem is, listen, they were letting barrels go bad, barrels that have been sitting for 20, 25 years because they couldn't sell the product for decades. Right. And so you got to remember, to make a straight whiskey or to make, it takes time. Right. And so when you have double-digit growth that we've seen for the last 10 years, nobody had juice in barrels. Right. It's caused huge problems in the market about as far as availability. Right. It's driven, you see age statements dropping off of bottles because they can't guarantee any longer that Knob Creek is going to be 9 years old. So you see that. And again, it's not something we've not seen in the history of bourbon. Right. And we're going to end up with way too much bourbon in 20 years, and everybody's going to be forgotten about the craze, and they'll stop producing it again. We'll run back into, three generations from now. They'll be like, damn, whiskey, that's really good. Well,
that's interesting to think about. Yeah, because it's once it's popular, then it all sells out. Then you don't have any for 4 years at least, right?
Well, depending on what you're bottling, absolutely. Right. I mean.
And do you think Scotch kind of they've been around a little longer, so maybe that's where the the blends kind of, well, I mean, because they start, hey, we got all this stuff. I don't know.
I think we saw Scotch go through a smaller spike like this in the 90s. Yeah. Where we had a fairly robust group of adorers who really got into single malts. And part of this comes along with Diageo releasing all these single malts that they had for Johnny Walker Black and their other blending programs. They own 39 distilleries in Scotland, 39 single malt and 2 grain. Wow. So they decided we're going to release this grouping that we have a little too much of right now. And that piqued people's interests.
Okay.
And I think it's exactly how the bourbon boom got started. Late 90s, you see Jim Beam come out with Basil Hayden, Knob Creek, and these products that they're already Beam products, but now they're focusing in on maybe they're only pulling the product from the 7th floor of a rickhouse.
Right.
So instead of blending it back in to make regular Jim Beam, this whiskey off the 7th floor seems to have something different. We're going to have this as Baker's.
Sure.
Then you have Booker's, because old Booker Noe would go up and for his evening drink pour a pint out of a certain cask. So they started giving that cask, they started bottling that and giving it away as Christmas gifts to executives.
Okay.
So that collection they put out in the late 90s, I think, planted the seeds that took a long time to grow into what we see, the velocity that bourbon has right now.
Do you think that Booker's is still the same product as it was?
I do. Yeah. Because Jim Beam is so big, and because everything, they have so many rick houses. They can feed that program from that particular location and all these different rick houses and keep that fed at a pretty, that was always, this is the first time we saw like $80 bottles in the market. Yeah. Now it's commonplace to see that kind of pricing really 30 years later. Yeah. It's an interesting ride. At the end of the day, I'm glad people are interested in it. I wish they quit discovering my go-to inexpensive bottles.
I know.
You see Forbes like, hey, this bottle's under $14 and it's great, and suddenly I can't get it.
Well, that's happened with anything Buffalo Trace, really. Even Buffalo Trace,
Buffalo
you
Trace
just can't find it.
Been around a long time, and you ask 100 people, Buffalo Trace right now, and you might have 20 say, "Oh, I know what you're talking about." Right. Yes, 100 people 15 years ago, man, nobody's going to know that this distillery makes all these brands, because we've connected now the brand to the distillery, which there was none of that. People didn't realize that we only had 18 distilleries making all of the domestic product in the U.S. between Prohibition and Tito's.
Right. Yeah.
Tito's is license number 19 in the country. So every domestic brand was made by a very small amount of manufacturers, really. Yeah. And Buffalo Trace was always there.
And so, because Jim Beam, obviously, Jack Daniels isn't a bourbon, but it meets all the criteria to be a bourbon, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
But Jim Beam, so their product's readily available. I would imagine they sell more, so it's just a bigger operation than Buffalo Trace. So that's why they're able to keep products on the shelves, and Buffalo Trace probably isn't, or...
Part of it. It is a massive operation. I think that they were also, Beam had a very small stable of products for many, many years. You got white label and black label, which is the only thing. Everything else they're selling on contract to non-producing distillers, or even distillers who are using it to, didn't have a production capacity, would buy it. Yeah. So for Beam, they had so much in barrel they were selling on contract. As their sales started to rise along with bourbon, all they did is stop renewing contracts. Okay. So they were able to scrape back an enormous amount of product that they had in barrel by just not renewing a contract with a smaller brand. Okay. So that was why they were able to, I think, maintain the momentum that they have right now.
I gotcha. And then, I don't know. I'm probably going to let you get out of here soon. I've kept you long enough, but I want to do the most annoying. I want to ask you the most annoying bartender question. What's your favorite drink?
The one you're buying me. Yeah.
Obviously, you're a bartender like me. People are like, "What do you drink?" I'm like, "Well, probably a shot of whiskey and a beer." You know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm a pretty simple drinker.
But I think a margarita, it's, in my opinion,
so
it's one of the greatest.
I think you nailed it. I think as a quintessential drink that is extraordinarily difficult to actually pull off correctly, and there's a couple of reasons for it. Finding the balance point in the drink is not easy because everybody has their own opinion of what the drink should be. Right. From the TGI Fridays crowd up to Tommy's in San Francisco.
Because TGI Fridays, that was another thing back in the 80s that they kind of brought it, I think.
No, their training system was robust.
Yeah.
When I first started my project management consulting business, that was one of the things I would collect with anybody that had worked there. I'm like, oh, do you have your old manuals?
Yeah.
And I would collect their manuals because it was, to get through their training program was not easy.
Right.
What was expected as far as drink knowledge and product knowledge and ability, they were leading the way for anything you want to think about them. But bartenders that came out of that system were highly, highly trained.
Right.
And I think that I certainly took a lot of my cues on how I educated staffs, whether it was through bartender to bartender education or I was hired to come in and train staffs. Yeah. I took a lot from them. I always, as a hiring manager, I always liked in a new restaurant to have several people who had worked in chains before. Right. Because they bring a sense of that they understand operations and straight line that other people never got that education in. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, TGI Fridays was a good training. But the margarita, that's it. You've had mine. You know how sweet. Yeah. You know, I think yours is hyper sweet. You think mine is hyper bright. Right. Yeah, you have people like Tommy's margarita. I'm a purist usually, but Tommy's margarita, which is nothing but lime juice and tequila, a little agave syrup, take out the orange note of it. I think it's a hard drink to make, to get it right, because everybody has a very different expectation.
Well, it has to be fresh.
It's got to be fresh. That's the lime juice is the key. Yeah, that really is, and a good silver tequila. Mixtos. Don't drink Mixtos for any reason whatsoever.
And because I think the margarita it is the perfect drink in my eyes. But I think a bourbon should just be drank, either neat or on ice. But I've been doing old fashions lately, and I was like, why do you have to put simple syrup in it when you could just use amaretto?
Oh, I think,
you know what I mean? And it's
there's a bartender. There's a bartender out in Portland who actually taught that to me, where a whisper of amaretto actually goes a long way. Yeah. And it came through. He had actually discovered it because he had done the reverse. How do you take the amaretto sour and make it more adult? Yeah. And his trick was to add a good half ounce of rye whiskey to the amaretto sour. Nice. And it gives it this stiff backbone. Still gives you that, that beautiful flavor. Yeah. You're using fresh lemon juice, and you have this nice bright, but that backbone of rye. So flipping that around was the next obvious step. And that little touch of amaretto. Yeah. I get that completely.
Nice. Well, Joe, thank you.
Thank you, Vince.
It was nice to see you. I haven't seen you in a while since the whole COVID thing.
Yeah, it's been a few with the COVID. Drinking in my garage now.
Oh, yeah. I've noticed, because I didn't really drink a lot at home before this whole thing, and now it's like that's pretty much all I do is kind of drink at home. I went out a couple times, but it's the experience of going out right now is not the same as it used to be.
No, it's I've been maybe inside a restaurant or bar maybe 2 times since this started, and it's just I don't need it because I got the kids at home and wife, and everything is so busy right now. But the couple times I have been out, it's only been with one other person. Like, I can see that. Like, if you want to go hang out with just the wife or a friend, but to get 5 or 6 people involved, it just seems like, it's better to do it in the backyard these days. It just doesn't. It's kind of a pain in the butt in the bars with the groups.
Well, Joe DeLuca, bartender, artist, historian, I'm going to say, extraordinaire. Thanks for stopping by.
Thanks, Vince. Appreciate it.